So yeah, as you heard, I'm one of the data scientists with our InfoSight team, and I'm here to talk to you about the features we've been developing on the InfoSight side. Before I get into all the new features, I do want to, of course, at least put on the screen some of the many features that have been important to InfoSight as we've developed it over the years. Things like the Envision that Rod described are pretty keystone elements of sort of making this feature really a differentiator for us. But we're always looking towards the future, so I really want to be able to spend most of my time today talking about the new features, some of the new features we've rolled out fairly recently here. So all these features are sort of conceptually related to one another, and so I want to set some background context for them. We hear from our sales teams that our customers, when they get their array, they've obviously worked with the sales teams to size it for a particular workload. But after time goes on, they love it so much, they start piling on some additional workloads. It's very easy to sort of run into a situation where, oh, now I've outgrown my system. Since its inception, we understood the natural growth of workloads and this potential issue. So we've always had the capability to automatically recommend particular hardware upgrades when those situations occur. But what's interesting is that when we actually look at our sales and support teams and we're asking them, what new features would you guys like to see in InfoSight that would really be beneficial to the way you interact with the customer? They're constantly saying, the customers when they outgrow their systems, they really want to know, when they receive that alert from InfoSight, you have an upgrade recommendation. They want to be able to do their due diligence and really understand, are there opportunities for restructuring the way that their workload is putting demands on the system to potentially give themselves some extra runway, or to potentially put them in a situation where maybe they could avoid having to do that upgrade soon, or at least to have done that due diligence to make sure that is in fact what they really feel that they need. Because oftentimes there are some sort of trivial optimizations that could be made on the workload side. So until recently, customers would need to consult with either their support and sales teams directly to fully explore these possibilities. InfoSight's whole premise is around the ability to give people visibility and transparency into their environment and to empower them to do some of these elements themselves. So that's what these features are really focused around. So when you're tackling this problem, when workload changes what workload changes could help a customer get the most out of the hardware that they currently have? It's important to know a few things. Firstly, what periods of time are most important for them to really be considering when they're looking at their system? Additionally, what workloads are active at those times, and how might they be impacting one another? And last but not least, if you identify a resource-hungry workload that's consuming a lot of system resources, is that part of a sort of a scheduled job? Is that part of the usual wax and wane of the consumption of resources on my system? Or is that kind of a one-off event that is maybe less representative of what is normal? And so I'm going to be diving into new features that are focused on each of these tasks individually. Our first feature is about knowing when latency matters, which is a performance impact score we developed to really help people understand when they're most sensitive to performance issues. We have tools designed to help visualize workload activity and contention. And that's in our InfoSight Labs area, which is an area where we're sort of incubating new features for our for support and sales teams to work with our customers with to enable them to have more visibility into their environment. And then last but not least, calendar view, heat map of workload activity. Again, to provide that additional transparency that we've seen customers and our SEs and support technicians asking for. So I'll start with the performance impact score. So I think that's one of the more interesting, really data science elements of this discussion. So I'm going to go into a couple of notes about some examples to begin with. Because we're talking about systems that have outgrown their existing systems, it's going to be typical. They're real world customer systems. So I've gone and blanked out the names, and in many cases I've selected older hybrid systems as examples in order to illustrate the effects of saturated systems. So this is not generally our new high-end AFAs. These are usually going to be CS200s and lower-end systems where we've got customers that are outgrowing them, and we're helping advise that process. So I'm going to see if I can get actually the live page up here. So what we're seeing here is the new enhanced version of the array performance diagnostics page. if we take a look at this blue line, the latency chart, that's sort of what you come to typically expect from a storage vendor. They're going to provide you that latency chart. What's interesting to see for this particular user is they got sort of 2 time periods of interest here. They got this 3 to 4 a.m. and then more along the lines of a 7 a.m. Latency issue that are potentially worth noting and worth digging into.
So back up
but
and log in.
The issue is, if we just looked at that chart, we would immediately jump to that first period of time. We say, okay, that's what I'm going to work on first. That's my biggest issue. I want to dive in on that. What we found when we actually correlate real customer support cases where people have said, I'm experiencing a problem at time X, and we look at that and we correlate that with the telemetry that comes in from our array, the one thing that becomes readily apparent immediately is that not all latency is created equal. Based on the different I/O signatures of what people are doing on the arrays at different times, people can be much more or less sensitive to the latency on their system. And we really wanted to be able to capture and make that a sort of very trivially apparent to customers and users right away on our UI. And that's why we actually lead with our potential impact score. So what you can see here is if you're looking at this first time interval, 3 to 4 a.m., it's not really that red. Certainly not compared to the later event, which actually has, if you just look at the typical average latency, a much lower value. So what's going on? Well, it turns out this morning backup job, this large block, sequential I/O, it's not the kind of thing that's really going to be very impactful. It's not the kind of things that our customers call in about. Whereas the thing that's happening, morning hours, 7 a.m., people arriving at work, people trying to get things done, systems having some latency, much more sensitive to it, right? And so we've really been trying to develop a system that can know when you're actually experiencing a latency problem before anyone else. And so based on that, before the customer or an end user calls in about it, and because of that, that's what this feature aims to
accomplish. How do you calculate the potential impact score again?
So we actually have a model that we've trained and developed on our install base that correlates the real-world customer data to the real-world performance data. We can tag basically, is this worth noting for a performance event or not? And then we correlate that with an ensemble of stats which take into account I/O signatures, so the I/O size, distribution, as well as sequentiality distribution, all that content goes into that model that then classifies individual minutes and scores them accordingly. So we think that that's going to be sort of a powerful tool to help people look towards the right periods of time and focus on what they really need to remediate versus what they don't. So in summary, we have a machine learned model that we've trained to predict how impactful latency is going to be based on the underlying I/O signatures. The model comes from the correlation of real-world support cases with InfoSight telemetry. And we've seen in our testing that this model is several-fold more accurate at predicting whether a customer is going to perceive a performance issue than an actual raw latency average. So I'm going to move now into some of the InfoSight Labs apps we developed. And if you'll remember from the Storage Field Day past, we debuted InfoSight Labs as a space that really allows us to incubate new product features and get them into the hands of the customers early in their development cycle so we can immediately really help refine the usability of the experience and really sort of have a Darwinian experience with the different products that we have, the ones that get good feedback and that people start using, the ones that we champion and take forward, and then the other ones, we can refine later if need be. So this particular application is focused on how workloads impact one another when resources are saturated. So what we can see in this particular context, we have the ability to sort of configure the scope of what we're looking at on the left. But we really have 2 charts. On the top chart, we have workload activity. On the bottom chart, we have the latency of those workloads. You can actually also configure it to look at that potential impact score. So we have, if this is a laser pointer, yes it is. We actually have the volumes up here on the left, and then across the bottom we have the actual time of day. And what we can see from looking at the throughput on these different volumes, we can see that there's a spike of throughput on Nimble 02 volume at a particular time between 5 and 7 p.m. And that's sort of corresponding to when this particular system is out of resources, and that's impacting the activity on the adjacent volumes. So in this scenario, because you're able to dig in and actually see who are the big consumers, you can see that right immediately on this plot. You immediately know what actions you can take to remediate the situation. Quality of service limitations on this volume are what you're thinking about, right? So the question becomes, if Nimble 02 is really my highest priority workload, then that's the situation. Maybe I'm really going to need more resources for this array. But if it's not, then slap a throughput limit on there, and everything's good again, right? But you need that kind of visibility to be able to make those decisions. And so this is really designed to help create a situation where that's readily available to our users. The alternative that we see when systems get saturated is that sometimes you'll see workload very distributed across the entire system. Oftentimes that's due to workloads that are, if you have a coordinated backup job, or if you have a coordinated virus update or virus scan that's happening, perfect opportunity to stagger that, right? So we see plenty of times customers, if they'd only just staggered a few things, they would really be able to get much more bang out of the buck for their hardware. This is a great way to immediately visualize whether or not that's happening. And then third, but last but not least feature is once you've identified sort of one of those offending workloads, it's important to understand the context for that. We want to know, is a particular event a one-off event, or is it something that we see over and over again? What we're seeing here is actually this app. Again, I'm sort of picking the configuration here. I've dialed it in to look at the Exchange databases on actual Nimble IT. What I'm able to see from this chart, so I've got the day of the week here on the left, and I've got the time of day here on the bottom. Activity is denoted in the coloration.
What's the activity scale?
This activity scale is currently set to IOPS. Sorry?
It's hard to read.
Fine.
Red is
IOPS.
4K,
Red is 4,000 IOPS?
and that's what the key on the right says. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
great,
Yes.
'cause
Okay. Yes.
Some of us are old and far away.
Got it. Yes. No. This is.
Yeah, and colorblind wouldn't help you with this at all.
Zoomed out.
You can convert them to grayscale if you want.
It's true. Well, that was some
No,
people
no.
are colorblind.
I'm not
We want to have that
colorblind,
option.
but yeah.
But
I'm not
This would be-
colorblind, I'm just blind.
it is very tiny. Yes, 4K for this particular system. So what we're seeing here is that Monday through Friday, we've got sort of a recurring pattern of activity between 5 a.m. and sort of 5 p.m. Not very much activity on the weekends. This is an email server, so you have most people emailing during the week. So when you notice that recurring pattern, you're also then able to sort of pick out the outliers. For example, on this Sunday, there's some activity happening very much outside the normal bounds. That's potentially a one-off background. That's activity that IT is deploying to do maintenance on the system.
Oh, so as the IT guy, I can notice that increased activity on Sunday and then play the stock market, because, yeah.
But it's useful for knowing the context, right? So if I look on Monday and I see this sort of continuing activity into the night, that will either send off alarm bells for me, because that's a job that I don't be expecting to be occurring, and potentially, if I'm seeing contention on those kinds of hours, I'm much less concerned than potentially seeing spikes during the normal business hours. That could be something that I actually need to size my system better.
Am I able to set up alerts based on that type of activity happening, where I get an email saying, "Hey, I see this when you told me to, 10 o'clock at night, I'm seeing
Right.
activity."
So that's a great question. So the way that we envision these apps progressing, and right now, it is kind of a hands-on scenario because there does require some interpretation. So the sales and technical support engineers are going to work with the customers and to understand their environment using these tools. But what we ultimately want to do is to have the high-level sort of important patterns of this bubbled up to the user just in the InfoSight portal, so that if you're having resource contention, we want to be able to immediately tell you the context. This is a part of your typical daily workload versus this seems like an
Is that a yes
outlier
or no?
event. So the answer is yes, we want to have alerts that.
Today we do not. But
Today we do not, but that's part of the overall
There's
arc
no
that we're
alerts
aiming
coming.
to it. Right.
Excellent.
Because
Not yet.
Fine.
Because ultimately, when you have such an alert standing on its own without the ability to drill into the context, we thought would be pretty, would be
Now,
not very useful.
this
We're
data,
starting
this is all
here.
running in the cloud, correct? Is this running on site, or is it running in the, or is it running?
So all this analysis is happening in InfoSight. It's cloud.
Okay.
So the customer dials into our
Do we
system.
have the ability to do anything back on the array based on data from InfoSight?
So we're always trying to find opportunities for readjusting what the array does. Usually the calculations that determine what the array are going to do are going to happen on the array, but there are some situations in which we're
From an administrative perspective, I see this, if this happens, do this, and automate some stuff.
Yeah, so I think I'll talk to a bit about that at the very literally last slide to sort of paint a vision for you of what we're thinking there.
Thanks.
Perfect. Yeah, but some of these do require a little bit of customer judgment in terms of prioritization, which is why we're making that available. So, and last but not least, one of the other examples I just wanted to show to flesh out this context, same visualization, but if you have sort of cron jobs that are firing off at regular intervals, those are patterns that you want to be able to see, and you also want to be able to see the pattern, from day to day. The highest spike that we're seeing for this customer is actually the confluence of sort of a regular recurring job sort of intersecting with just sort of a generally busy day. Having that context about why your workload is spiking, recognizing it's not necessarily an isolated event, but really a confluence of sort of two different events is really important, I think, to provide the customer knowledge about how they want to restructure what they're doing on their system if they want to get the most bang out of the buck. And I'll skip over this for time. But in summary, InfoSight has long been able to do these hardware recommendations, but we really want to be able to take it to the next step where we can recommend and at least beginning to start provide guidance into other remediations. And that includes noisy neighbor volumes that could have a QoS limit applied to them. That includes looking for concerted activity across multiple volumes that could constitute the opportunity for staggering a workload that may otherwise just be sort of just happening at the same time. And also helping you distinguish when resources are being consumed by scheduled jobs or sort of recurring day-to-day user login situations, as opposed to sort of outlier one-off events that seems like could be a potential IT intervention with a one-off job fired off at maybe the wrong time. So yeah, as we said, we look forward to building this functionality, including automatic callouts for the remediations and recommendations that we're going to build on top of this. So, thank you very much.
There you go.
May I?
Yeah,
Go for it.
So in many other storage manufacturers, there are native tools for providing insight into that storage that go beyond just performance. And I'm not saying that it's negative. Performance is critical, of course, in the storage world, but other kinds of analytics, like the data sitting on those volumes and potentially deduplication of replicated data and that kind of thing. Is there some roadmap for including those kinds of analytics into something like InfoSight?
I think InfoSight includes a lot of information about breakdowns about where you're getting different levels of deduplication. That's all absolutely part of the portal today. In some sense, we almost have such a rich feature set that I really sort of wanted to focus our attention on sort of a subset of things that we're doing. And performance is really, from I think the inception of Nimble as a company, been just something that we've had maniacal focus on. And so that's why we're spending sort of a lot of time and investment on a feature set that's oriented in that direction. But absolutely, so data protection as well as sort of the data footprint and compressibility. All of those are different main features on the portal and have been for a long time. And I don't have time to necessarily go into a demo of each of those right now, but we can talk after, or you can definitely go to some.
Yeah, I'm not sure I heard your entire question, but just one sort of phrase that maybe you said there. We don't have any visibility into the customer data stream or type coming down the wire or anything to the array and so on to optimize for whether encryption or whether compression would be good or bad per se.
Compliance, text strings, those kinds of things as well.
Yeah, so we don't have that visibility with anything we collect. It's really just operational data.
Right, we find that some customers do get squeamish about letting you crack open the actual data packets, and so that's not a direction that we've gone into.
Yeah. So this was InfoSight, so that's only the performance statistics from the array itself. But you've also got VM Vision, looking at the scan.
Absolutely.
Are you thinking about integrating that in the performance matrix as well?
Exactly. So everything that you saw there is very readily extensible up into the VMware space, and we absolutely have plans to do that.
Yeah. When is it on the roadmap?
So it's not too much extra work for us to adapt many of the things that we showed today up, and so I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see that in the next few months. We're always sort of jockeying around which things coming next, but I would look for that very soon.
Our focus has always been, do really rich things with the array and then take it up the stack, and that's where VM Vision came in. And when you see this sort of more deeper analytics at the array level, you'll see it up the stack as well.
Yeah.
It's just for the reason that I said before, we understand the importance of that. There's no way we would leave that out of the mix. It's
Yeah.
way too important.
Yep.